Let me introduce myself. I'm Jenna, an assistant manager at a bustling marketing firm. For years, my life revolved solely around deadlines and presentations, until Mark came along. We met at a corporate event. He was the keynote speaker, talking about innovative architectural designs. He was confident, something that drew me in immediately, but what really caught me was his unassuming smile when he talked about his projects. A year after that meeting, I was not just attending another conference, but also planning a wedding. Mark proposed unexpectedly during a quiet dinner at home, a stark contrast to the public persona I first met. We married in a small ceremony, and I moved into the house he shared with his mother, Susan. Susan was a small woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. She greeted me on moving day, sizing me up with a critical eye as I lugged my boxes inside. "Make sure those boxes don't scuff the floors," she instructed, her voice stern. "Of course, Susan. I'll be careful," I responded, trying to keep my tone light. I learned quickly that Susan had rules for everything, from where to place my shoes to how the dishwasher should be loaded. It was her house, after all, and I was keen on making a good impression. Living with one's mother-in-law could be challenging, but I was determined to make it work. But it wasn't just the rules. There were the Sunday dinners when Susan would recount tales of raising Mark by herself, a monumental effort after her husband left following their daughter's death. She would look away sometimes, her voice dropping a notch. It was tough, raising a boy alone. But we managed, didn't we, Mark? Mark would nod, pass the potatoes, and quickly change the subject. I got the sense that these stories were Susan's way of reminding me of her sacrifices. One particularly chilly evening, as Mark was late from work again, Susan and I found ourselves alone. She was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of her famous beef stew, when I decided to join her, trying to break the ice. "Can I help with anything?" I offered. She glanced over her shoulder, then pointed at the salad. "Dress that. And don't drown it in vinegar like last time." Her words stung a bit, but I kept my smile. "I'll get it right this time." As I mixed the salad, Susan continued her monologue about the past. "Mark was always such a sensitive child. Needed more looking after than most boys. It's good you're here now. Maybe you'll manage better than I did," she said, her words a mix of hope and challenge. Settling into life with Susan and Mark proved to be a complex dance of personal boundaries and shared spaces. The early days were tough, with Susan watching every move I made around the house. But as time wore on, I started finding my rhythm, and oddly enough, it was the moments when Mark was away that brought Susan and I closer. One lazy Saturday afternoon, while Mark was out on one of his frequent business trips, Susan invited me to join her for coffee. The living room was cozy, a stark contrast to the cold formalness Susan usually exuded. "Sit down, Jenna. Coffee's almost ready," she called from the kitchen. "Thanks, Susan," I replied, taking a seat on the plush sofa, trying to make myself comfortable amid the embroidered cushions. Susan sat opposite me, her eyes studying me over the rim of her cup. "Mark tells me you're handling the new project at work," she said, her tone more curious than intrusive. "Yeah, it's a big one. Lots of late nights ahead," I responded, appreciating that she was making an effort to talk about something other than household chores. Susan nodded, then her expression shifted as she seemed to decide on something. "Jenna, I know we've had our, let's say, adjustments. But I want you to know, I'm glad he chose you." Her words took me by surprise. "Thank you, Susan. That means a lot." We sipped our coffee in a more comfortable silence than before, the air between us lighter. "Did Mark ever tell you about his sister?" Susan suddenly asked, setting her mug down. "No, not really," I admitted, curious about the family history Mark rarely mentioned. Susan leaned back, her gaze distant. "It was a hard time, losing her. Changed everything for us." "I can only imagine," I said softly, sensing the pain behind her words. Susan shook her head slightly. "You never get over something like that." But you learn to live, I suppose. That's why I've been hard on you. I needed to know if you could handle this family, with all its scars. Her honesty was unexpected but welcome. I'm here to stay, Susan. I want to make this work, for all of us. She nodded, a ghost of a smile flickering across her face. I'm counting on it. Mark's father, he never got over it, Susan continued, looking into her coffee as though it held the past. He blamed me for our little girl's death. Said I should have been more careful, should have done something differently. But there was nothing I could have done, nothing to foresee. It tore us apart, and he left not long after. From then on, our relationship took on a new dimension. It wasn't perfect overnight, but there was a mutual respect forming. Evenings often found us in the kitchen together, where Susan would reluctantly pass me the salad bowl without a critical remark, where I would handle the delicate china with care without being reminded. Life at Susan's place settled into a routine, one that was comfortable in its predictability. I still put long hours at work, but now there was more to come home to. One particular evening, I discovered something that would change our lives forever. I was pregnant. The realization hit me like a freight train. I was going to be a mom. Excited and nervous, I bought a couple of those test kits, just to be sure. Each one confirmed what I already knew: our family was about to get bigger. I planned how to break the news to Mark, imagining a perfect, joyous moment. That night, when he came home from work, I had dinner ready, his favorite, spaghetti and meatballs. The table was set, the candles lit. I could barely contain my excitement. "Hey, babe, something smells good," Mark said, loosening his tie as he walked in. "Sit down, I've got news," I said, my voice trembling a bit with nerves. Mark raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on his lips. "Good news, I hope?" I nodded, handing him a small box I'd wrapped. Inside was the positive pregnancy test. "We're going to have a baby," I blurted out before he could open it. Mark's smile faltered. He paused, looking at the test, then back at me. "Wow, are we ready for this?" His reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. "I think we are. I mean, I know we hadn't planned this now, but I'm happy, Mark, aren't you?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that I'm not happy, Jen. It's just, babies are a big deal, and they need a lot, and we can do this," I cut in, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll still work, we'll manage. We always do." Mark nodded slowly, still not quite meeting my eyes. Yeah, of course. We'll manage. It's just a lot to take in, you know?" Dinner went on, the candles burning lower, the initial excitement I felt dampening under the weight of Mark's hesitant acceptance. It was clear we had a lot to talk about, a lot to figure out. The next day, after a night of little sleep and much thought, Mark handed me a list over breakfast. It was detailed, outlining everything he thought needed to be addressed before and after the baby arrived. I looked over the list. Separate bedrooms after the baby's born, schedules for nighttime feedings, budget adjustments. And all this should have been done only by me. "Mark, this feels like it's just my baby, not ours," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Mark didn't respond immediately, his jaw tightening. "Well, of the two of us, you want this baby the most, so it's fair." That day, I didn't just confront the reality of becoming a mother, but also the complexities of how it would impact my relationship with Mark. It was clear that while this baby was a part of us, the path forward wouldn't be without its challenges. As my pregnancy progressed, the atmosphere at home took on a subtle shift. I'd expected joy, or at least a growing sense of shared anticipation, but instead, there was an undertone of tension, particularly from Susan. It felt like every time I caught her eye, there was a flicker of something, discomfort, maybe even disapproval. One crisp evening, as the leaves started turning golden, I decided to address the elephant in the room. Susan was in the kitchen, meticulously peeling apples for a pie. The silence between us had grown too loud to ignore. "Can we talk?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, trying to keep my voice light. Susan glanced up, her hands pausing for a moment. About how things are with us, since the baby news, I said. Susan put down the peeler, wiped her hands, and sighed. Jenna, it's nothing personal. I'm used to how things are around here. I nodded, understanding her more than she realized. I get that, Susan. But things are going to change. It doesn't mean it has to be bad. Susan resumed her peeling, a bit more forcefully. Changes aren't always for the better. As the weeks went on, Susan seemed to adjust to the idea of the baby. When my belly had obviously grown large, one afternoon she commented, "I'll be around to help with the baby. It'll be good having a little one in the house again." "That's great to hear, Susan," I said, a bit relieved, but then added, "You know, it's a girl." The change in Susan's face was immediate and stark. "A girl," she repeated, her voice flat. "Yeah, a girl," I confirmed, feeling a sudden chill. Susan looked away, her voice cold. "I don't like girls." The air felt heavier, denser. "Well, she's still your granddaughter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Susan didn't respond, just continued with her cooking, and I knew that whatever semblance of peace we'd found was on shaky ground. As we moved through the weeks, Mark's demeanor also shifted. His work became busier, or so he said, leaving me alone most evenings and weekends. His absences were a stark contrast to the early days of our marriage, filled with long conversations and shared meals. Now, I was lucky if we spent a few hours together on Sundays. As my due date approached, I found myself often alone, wondering how our small, soon-to-be family could feel so disjointed. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the nursery we'd prepared, running my hands over the soft blankets, the tiny clothes. This room, filled with all the things a baby could need, felt like the only place that was ready for her arrival. The day Ava was born was the most transformative day of my life. After hours of labor, when I finally held her in my arms, all the pain melted away. It was just me and her, and the world seemed to pause. Bringing Ava home was supposed to be the start of a beautiful new chapter. But the reality was far from what I had envisioned. Mark was at the hospital for the birth, but his presence felt more obligatory than supportive. He held Ava briefly, then handed her back like he was afraid he might break her. "Mark, isn't she beautiful?" I said, looking up at him with our daughter in my arms. "Yeah, she's great," he replied, but his eyes were scanning emails on his phone. I tried to brush off his detachment, focusing instead on Ava and the new motherly duties that filled my days and nights. As the weeks passed, Mark's absences grew longer. He was either buried in work or out with friends. "I need some air, Jen. You've got everything covered here," he'd say, kissing my forehead before disappearing for hours. It was during one of his absences that Susan's true colors regarding Ava started to show. Initially, when we brought Ava home, Susan had seemed to soften slightly, watching me feed her or change her with something that almost looked like curiosity. But that changed one day when Ava wouldn't stop crying. I was rocking her, walking up and down the living room, utterly exhausted. Susan walked in, her expression sour. "Can't you make her stop? All this noise is giving me a headache," she snapped. I was too tired to argue. "I'm trying, Susan. She's just a baby, she doesn't understand." "Well, you need to do something. Maybe take her out for a walk or something. Get her out of the house," Susan suggested, but her tone was far from helpful. As the weeks turned into months, the situation at home grew tense. Ava's colic didn't improve, and with Mark hardly around and Susan's constant remarks, I felt more alone than ever. One particularly tough evening, when Ava had been fussing nonstop and Mark was out again, I reached my breaking point. I called Mark, the sound of Ava's cries echoing in the background as I spoke. "Mark, I need you to come home. Please, I can't do this alone tonight," I pleaded. There was a pause before he responded. "Jen, you know I have a lot on my plate right now. You're doing great with Ava. She'll tire herself out soon." I hung up, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. When he finally came home late that night, he found me asleep on the couch, Ava finally quiet in my arms. "Look, Jen, I'm trying here. But you wanted this, remember?" His words cut deep. I looked up at him, too tired to cry. Yes, I wanted Ava. But I wanted us to be a family, Mark. I can't be the only one trying. Mark didn't say anything, just walked off to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a sleeping baby. That morning, my home office was a disaster zone, papers everywhere, and my laptop screen filled with endless data. The deadline for my report was looming large, and stress was my constant companion. Ava, only a few months old, was unusually cranky, adding to the chaos. In desperation, I turned to Mark. "Can you watch Ava for a few hours? I really need to focus." Mark, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else but here, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and pointed at it. "Remember this? We agreed you'd handle Ava during the day." "I've got my own work, Jenna." I stared at him, feeling a surge of frustration. "It's just for a few hours, Mark. Can't you help out just this once?" He shook his head, unmoved, and turned back to his computer. Just then, Susan walked into the room, her expression unreadable. "I'll watch her," she said abruptly. I was taken aback, given her usual reluctance to involve herself with Ava. "Are you sure, Susan?" "Yes, go on. Get your work done." Grateful despite my reservations, I grabbed my things and headed to the office. The quiet there was a stark contrast to the tension at home. I buried myself in work, my mind only half on the financial analyses and forecasts. Hours later, drained from the mental exertion, I returned home. The house was silent. Too silent. In the living room, I found Susan watching TV, seemingly at ease. "Where's Ava?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "She's been sleeping quietly in her crib," Susan replied without turning to look at me. Surprised and relieved, I tiptoed to the nursery. There she was, Ava, looking peaceful in a way that she hadn't for days. It was a relief, but a part of me stirred with unease. She usually never slept this long without waking. I went back to my home office to catch up on more work, but as the night wore on, a nagging worry grew. Ava hadn't woken for her feeding, hadn't made a sound. Something wasn't right. Rushing back to the nursery, I reached for Ava, gently shaking her shoulder. "Ava, sweetie, wake up," I whispered. No response. Panic clawed at me. I scooped her up, feeling her too still, too quiet. "Ava!" I cried louder, hoping for any sign of awakening. Nothing. Mark heard the commotion and appeared at the door, annoyance etched on his face. "What's the problem?" "She's sleeping, isn't that what you wanted?" "She's not waking up, Mark. Something's wrong." My voice was sharp with fear. Susan came in behind him, her face set in a frown. "Stop being dramatic, Jenna. You're just overreacting." I held Ava closer, and that's when I smelled it, a faint but distinct odor of alcohol. "She smells like alcohol." "Why does she smell like alcohol?" I gasped, my heart racing. "You're imagining things," Susan snapped, her voice harsh. "Just lay her down and go rest." But I couldn't. I couldn't just lay her down. I dialed 911, my hands trembling as I explained the situation. Every second felt like an eternity, waiting for the ambulance, clutching Ava, praying for her to stir. The moment the ambulance arrived, everything became a blur. The paramedics rushed into our home, and even Mark and Susan finally emerged from their rooms, their expressions unreadable. They silently watched as the paramedics worked on Ava, checking her vital signs and quickly assessing her condition. The urgency in their movements was terrifying. One of the paramedics called out as he lifted Ava carefully. "We need to move fast. She's unresponsive." As they wheeled her out on the stretcher, I followed, barely aware of my own feet moving. At the hospital, doctors swarmed around Ava, their voices a mix of calm and urgency. I stood there, frozen, until one of them approached me holding a feeding bottle. "Is this what you've been feeding her?" the doctor asked, his tone serious. I took the bottle, my hand shaking. It was half full of a clear liquid. "No, this isn't milk. What is this?" My voice cracked as the realization hit me. The doctor's face was grim. "It's alcohol. It was in her crib. She's in critical condition because of it." Hearing those words, my legs gave out, and the room spun. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed, a nurse hovering over me. "Where's Ava? How's my daughter?" I asked immediately, trying to sit up. "Take it easy," the nurse gently pushed me back down. "Your daughter is stable now. We've managed to clear the alcohol from her system. She's doing much better." As the nurse stepped out, a couple of social workers came in. Their expressions were somber as they introduced themselves. "We've been informed about the situation," one of them started. "It appears your mother-in-law was responsible for giving your daughter alcohol. She told us it was to help her sleep and not be a disturbance." I felt sick. The reality of Susan's actions was horrifying. She did this, on purpose? Yes, she admitted to diluting cognac and giving it to Ava. "We've already contacted the police. They're handling it from here," the other social worker added. As they spoke, memories flooded back, the stories Susan had told about her past, her daughter's tragic death. It hit me then, a chilling thought. Could this be how her own daughter died? "She always said her husband blamed her for their daughter's death," I muttered, half to myself. The social workers exchanged a look. "We'll make sure to mention this to the police. It could be relevant to their investigation." After they left, I lay back, exhausted and overwhelmed. My mind raced with what needed to be done next. It wasn't just about recovering from this nightmare, it was about protecting Ava from ever experiencing anything like this again. When Mark came to visit, his face pale, he looked like he was about to speak, but I cut him off. "How could you not see what was happening? She was under the same roof as us, Mark." I didn't know," he stammered, looking away. "I'm sorry. I should have been there more. I should have seen." "Sorry isn't enough, Mark, I want to get a divorce," I said firmly, my resolve hardening. It was about taking action, making sure our daughter never had to suffer like this again. After everything that happened, going back to the house I once shared with Mark was out of the question. Ava and I moved in with my parents for a while as I sorted things out. During that time, I filed for divorce. It was a tough decision, but necessary for our well-being. The court proceedings were draining. In the end, Susan was sentenced to a short term in prison. They could not prove Susan's guilt in her daughter's death, and had to pay a hefty financial compensation. Mark was ordered to pay child support. It wasn't about the money, though, it was about ensuring Ava's future was secure. A few months later, I bought an apartment. It was small, but it was ours, a sanctuary for Ava and me. We decorated it with bright colors and filled it with laughter and new memories. It was during this time of rebuilding our lives that I received an unexpected visitor. Mark's father, Greg, came by one afternoon. I hadn't seen much of him over the years, but he was always kind and had a gentle manner. His visit was a surprise, and honestly, a bit unsettling at first. "Jenna, I hope it's all right that I stopped by," he started, his hat in his hands, a nervous habit. "Of course, Greg. It's good to see you," I said, leading him into the living room. "Would you like some coffee?" As I brewed the coffee, Greg's purpose for visiting became clear. He wasn't just here to exchange pleasantries. "Jenna, there's something important I need to tell you," he said, his voice heavy with seriousness. "Susan, she did the same thing to her that she did to Ava. I've always suspected it, but I couldn't prove anything." His confession stunned me. The patterns of the past mirroring the present were chilling. Greg's next words were unexpected. "I've decided to bequeath my estate to Ava. She deserves a secure future, one that's not overshadowed by the mistakes of her grandmother. I was taken aback by his generosity. "Greg, that's incredibly kind of you. Ava is lucky to have you." As Ava toddled into the room a few moments later, Greg's face lit up with a joy that was pure and heartfelt. Watching them together, I felt a sense of peace. Despite the turmoil, here was a bond that remained unbroken, a connection that could bring healing. With Greg's support and the new life Ava and I were building, the future looked brighter. I continued to work from home, balancing my career with being a full-time mom. Each day was filled with small achievements and large milestones, and I cherished them all.